Hello and welcome to the Masters Swimming Podcast, available on all the major podcast platforms and on YouTube. I'm Joe Malone, and joining me this week is former Olympic modern pentathlete and sports scientist, Professor Greg Whyte. So welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Well, listen, thanks for having me on, Joe. It's great to be here.
No, great to have you for sure. There's so much to your repertoire that I kept it to Olympian and sports scientist, but you've also won European and World Championship medals. You were awarded an OBE in 2014 for your services to sport, sports science and charity. You're a published author. You've coached celebrities to help them complete comic relief challenges, and you were voted one of the top 10 science communicators in the UK by the British Science Council. I mean, that is quite a career.
It's a bit boring, isn't it? No, do you know what? Listen, it's been a great career, but I guess what that does, it tells you how old I
am. No, it's fantastic. But more importantly, you're a master swimmer, which is brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely love it, and it's really interesting. I sort of got back into it, got really back into it when I was 49, coming on 50, and actually in that year I did this thing when I was 50. I did a 50 at 50. I did 50 swims all around the world to raise awareness for drowning prevention and learn to swim, because I'm an ambassador for the Royal Life Saving Society. And sort of thinking about that as part of it, and actually having missed training with a squad. All my training up to that point, once I'd sort of finished elite sport, was solo, and it just brought the joy back to training. And particularly, everyone knows it. Look, swimming can be a bit tedious, in terms of black line disease. But when you're in the water with a squad, and I'm up with Wickham District, who are just magnificent. And it's like being part of the family. It's like I often tell people about it, is that when I swam as a kid, people said, "Oh my God, how do you do so many sessions and that?" I said, because it was my social scene.
Yeah.
I went swimming to see my mates. I didn't go for the training. I went because my mates were there. And interestingly enough, I was up this morning doing an early morning session with the squad. And they, when you get to my age, getting up at 5 a.m. for a swim session,
5 a.m.
there are better things to do. But the great thing is that I go up and see my mates. So there's a real joy to it, I think. And if anybody's thinking about joining a squad, certainly a master's squad, it's joyous and makes such a difference to your training.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's the social side outside the pool as well, isn't there? The club that I swam for, I moved house a couple of months ago, and so I missed out, unfortunately. But they had a bit of a St. Patrick's Day night at the weekend, which sounded absolutely brilliant. So it's even those little bits, isn't it, that make a difference.
No, it really is. Christmas, and actually, I think what's great about it as well is that sometimes I think people are often scared of competition.
Yeah.
And they want to join. Look, number one is you don't have to compete.
Yeah.
If you join a master swim squad. But equally, I think when you join a master swim squad, what you realise is that they are such fun events. Masters events are. It's not like when you're a kid and everybody is uber. Everyone's on it and everyone wants to win. Actually, it's a festival. I always find masters events, and it's great to catch up with people you haven't seen for a long time. And to some extent, I always think that by the time you get to masters, the people the person that you're competing against is yourself.
Yeah, completely agree with that.
And it's very much about the clock, and so that's what makes it so great, really, because it's not because there's so many age groups and so much going on. You never really know where you've come anyway. It's you versus the clock, and so it makes it really quite a personal experience as well as being part of the team.
Yeah, I can relate to that, actually, because when I was a junior swimming, it was all about beating your mates, because you're all the same age. You compete against each other at your club championships, never mind at regionals or counties. And so every day is like trying to beat your mate. Whereas actually at a masters level, it is just about beating yourself, and I think that's lovely.
Yeah, no, it's great. It is great.
So I believe you're also known as Super Greg. Where did that come from? Who called you that?
Well, it was dubbed on Wikipedia, and it was actually off the back of an article. I can't remember. It was one of the Red Tops sort of dubbed it after we swam after I swam with David the Thames back in 2011. And I think at that point I've done about, I don't know, probably done about 20 challenges, sort of those high profile celebrity challenges. I've now done 36 of them. but yeah, for some reason they've done me Super Greg. It's not a handle that I personally use.
You didn't choose it yourself.
I didn't, and I definitely don't promote it.
Fair
And,
enough. Fair
and I'll
enough.
tell you something, my wife definitely doesn't promote it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I won't call you that anymore in this podcast. Then, how's that?
Please.
So I want to talk about both, physicality and mindset in sports. Obviously, swimming generally, but it's all relative. Going back to your competitive career, then as a modern pentathlete, I mean, you were training for so many different disciplines. I mean, you must have encountered some pretty major physical challenges. Injuries, fatigue, that sort of stuff. Just to talk to us about some of those main challenges that you faced.
Well, I mean, it's crazy. Multi-event sports are crazy because as they coin modern pentathlon. So anybody listening doesn't know, it's running, swimming, shooting, fencing, and show jumping. And some people would say you're a jack of all trades. The modern pentathletes like to say, look, you're a jack of all trades, but you're a master of one. But actually, the truth of it is that what you're trying to be is the best athlete you can be in each of those disciplines. And that's where it becomes difficult, is that you can't just be a great swimmer and expect to be a good modern pentathlete. You've got to be good at everything. And so because of that, the pressure is on from a training perspective to actually make sure you deliver in each of those. So what that meant at the peak of training for me, it was 17 sessions a week, somewhere in the region of about 40 hours a week. It was fundamentally a full-time job. And so, of course, with that, the demands on the body are absolutely enormous. And because they are, it's an interesting one, really, because it's something like swimming, when you're in the water for 20, 25 hours a week plus land, it's actually quite a close skill. You're repeating the same thing over and over again. So overuse injury is quite high in sports like that. In modern pentathlon, I think often it's weird injuries, and things like impact injuries. So I've got 2 degenerated lumbar discs from falling from a horse. I've got a weapon. So we used to fence with an épée.
Yeah.
The guy I was against, he snapped the end of it off, and then lunged into me, and it went in through my glove and up my arm, inside the skin, obviously, actually into the arm. And so you get those really weird injuries that you pick up as you go through. So it becomes quite complex, because what you're trying to do is manage the fatigue because of the volume of training that you're doing, but also what you're trying to do is an awful lot of prehab to avoid injury, and then actually management of really unusual injuries that you often pick up throughout training.
Yeah, it's those impact injuries are the worst, because I think with swimming, with the gym, things like that, you're in control of what you do. So again, it's overusage more than anything. But playing a team sport, something like fencing, you just can't legislate for somebody bashing you, or the fact that you have to react, twist and turn, and all these things. And it's I can imagine it's hard. Did you find that there were certain sports that kind of didn't translate well with everything else that you were training for from that physical point of view? Were there some sports that you were training for that you just thought, this is such a toll?
I think the weird thing about modern pentathlon is that none of the sports complement each other. I mean, running and swimming are so far apart, it's unbelievable. And then you add on something like fencing, and that's none of them are helping shooting, and equally none of them at all are helping show jumping. So I think it because of that, it's unlike something like, listen, and they are absolutely discrete, but things like heptathlon or decathlon in track and field, if you improve strength and power in the upper body, then you'll actually benefit in the javelin and the shot put and probably the pole vault. But actually, that's what effectively called cross training. That cross training effect was virtually non-existent in modern pentathlon. In triathlon, triathlon is an interesting one, actually, because I think people assume that there's a lot of cross training benefit, but there really isn't to some extent. Bike and run, maybe. But swim sort of sits out on the side of that. So actually, what you are trying to do fundamentally is manage your time, because we're all time poor. Is trying to manage that time and the concomitant effort that you're putting into it. In other words, it's sort of fatigue inducing. So make sure that what you do is you get the best out of each aspect. so that everything's moving up the same. And that's really where the complexity comes. It's not
Mm,
about being good at one sport. You've got to be good at all of them.
absolutely. And did you find that sort of throughout the year there'd be certain disciplines that you maybe wouldn't train for a month or so, have a bit of a break from it, focus on other things, or did you try and always cover all of them?
Yeah, generally just couldn't do that. I mean, the analogy is swimming, really. If you're going to swim medley, if you're swimming the 400 medley, I don't suggest anybody does that. It's a crazy event. But what you can't do is take a month off fly,
Yeah, sure.
and then come back to it. The bottom line is that it is because what you're working is you're working neuromuscular function and skill, but then you're also working the physiological aspects to it. But add on top of that, you're then also adding the psychological
Mm,
aspects to it. And for me, what training is doing constantly is it's building on each of those aspects. So I think if you remove it, obviously if you're injured, etc., you've got to remove things. But if you remove it, then what you are going to do is have a detrimental, detraining effect in that
yeah.
particular aspect, which then you've got to try and pick up again. And I think, the great thing about sport is that, it is very hard won. But once you've got that conditioning and that fitness and that speed and that strength, etc., it's much easier to maintain it than it is to let it drop off and then try and regain it again.
Yeah, for sure. Did you find you went through like a real learning process with your body, like learning your body, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, when to step off, when to go hard, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and it's complex, and since that time, my work is fundamentally involved in that. I was director of research at the British Olympic Medical Centre, and then I was director of science and research at the English Institute of Sport, and it's interesting because what we have learned across time, and I think one of the big changes occurred sort of in the 80s, a little bit earlier than that in the Eastern Bloc, was actually this understanding of human physiology and also coaching science, sports medicine. All of those things sort of came together in that era, where we began to understand that firstly is that actually how do we alter training volume, and volume is intensity, frequency, and duration, and it's a combination of those. How do we manage that without causing excessive fatigue, which we don't bounce back from, and then ultimately unexplained underperformance syndrome and all those type of factors.
Yeah.
But equally as well, it's also about optimizing recovery so that we know exactly what volume we should be putting in, what type of recovery in order to optimize that. And so therefore what we are doing is this discrete amount of time that we've got available, we can actually optimize the use of that. And we saw that sort of start in the 80s. And I think sports science, obviously that's where I am, but complemented with sports medicine, and complemented with coaching science and a whole host of other factors, nutritional science, and all those type of things. I think we've seen a growth in understanding of how far we can push, and fundamentally that's why we see, albeit we are starting to narrow the way we break world records. And in fact, we're starting to reach the limits of human performance. Something I've written an awful lot about. But certainly, what we saw a rapid uptake. In the data we call it the beta value. We saw a rapid increase in performance, world record performances, based upon that knowledge. And of course, add on top of that, and really pertinent to swimming, is actually technology.
Mm.
Technology changed in the 70s and 80s. It's when you think about swimming pools, we moved to deck level pools.
Mm.
Anybody as old as me will remember swimming in Victorian pools that had that high sided, where it was like swimming in the ocean when you
Yeah.
went past, if you're in lane 1 or lane 6. But deck level pools, anti wave lane ropes, fixed depths, fixed temperatures make a massive difference. And then the quality of blocks for block starts, and the evolution of dives, and all of that stuff has made a massive difference to performance. And what really is crucial is just to try and as an athlete, whatever age group you are, wherever you are in that spectrum, is you're trying to optimize each and every aspect of that to enhance performance.
No, absolutely. I would imagine you had many coaches when you were full time, because obviously of all the different disciplines. But part of me thinks that you were sort of your own coach as well. You're so knowledgeable, and maybe a lot of that knowledge has come post full time athlete. But I get the impression you were very much in control of what you did.
You're saying I'm cocky? Is that what you said?
Not at all. Very knowledgeable. Very knowledgeable.
Headstrong. That's a better word. No. Do you know what? And I am. ultimately respectful of coaches because it is. I mean, I look after athletes now who are, well, I mean, one I was chatting to this morning, double Olympic gold medalist, is doing some incredible stuff, but actually still requires that sort of that mentorship, and it's not only about technical knowledge. I
Of
think,
course.
and for me, to some extent, that's why being part of a squad is fantastic. Dave G, who's the head coach for the Masters up at Wickham District, isn't that utter legend? And his team are incredible because what they are doing is creating the program that you follow. It takes all of that burden off you, but also the trust that you give them in that they know where you're at, how to get to where you're trying to get to, and that periodization of training into key competitions, whether it's nationals, counties, nationals, Europeans, or worlds, they're able to control that and monitor that. So I think it's for me it's great because I have been around it a very, very long time, and I guess I've spent as much time now. I'm trying to understand and unpick performance, but equally, I could not do it without. I could, but I wouldn't enjoy it as much without having good quality coaches around me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And interesting point on the mentorship, because a lot of it is about I remember hearing Mel Marshall talk about the way that she communicates with Adam Peaty changes throughout the year. There'll be times when she's really hard on him, and then times where she's really just praises him all the time because it's all about sensing playing with their emotions in a way to get the best out of them on performance.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so talking about mindset, then is that where as a professional, is that where you really felt the coach came in for you was to really get you going on race day?
No is the answer to that. I think. I think it's an interesting comment because I didn't know where you were going to go with that. But I think actually, to my mind, it's all done by race day. And I think the interesting thing about racing, and that's why we were sort of saying, why people should race,
Yeah.
is because it is, it's the test of what you've done. It's the test of everything you've done. That the physical preparation, the mental preparation, the technical, the tactical, and it's the one time. And listen, you never go as quick in a time trial in training as you do when you race,
No.
and you certainly never hurt yourself as much, as you do when you're racing. So I think, but to that end, I think actually much of it, everything is done at that point, and you're still learning. But what you're doing is you're applying everything you've learned at that point, and then you learn something from the race itself, and so that becomes really important. I think actually it's about making sure that you value the training. Is that there's no such thing as, I mean, we used to, when I was a kid. I mean, God, how swimming has changed. When I was a kid, you know, well, I mean, mates of mine who swam 1,500, they were doing 100,000 meters a week. And when you look
Absolutely
at that,
crazy.
it may be necessary for some people. Um, but I just remember some of these guys. I swam with internationals who they were swimming internationally at senior elite level over 1,500, and you saw that some of those sessions were utter. I mean, they call it garbage yardage, because they got nothing out of it, and you
Mm,
sort of think, well, look, you're fatiguing yourself
yeah,
for no positive outcome. And so I think it's about being smart about what we're doing throughout that process. But without any shadow of doubt, and I always say to the guys that I coach and I look after, is that every session delivers something. There might be a great deal of physical attached to it, but you're going to learn something psychologically, technically, tactically. You might learn something about nutrition that you're going to use throughout it, and those type of things. So it's just about making sure that you get a positive outcome from, and that to some extent leads on to goal setting.
mm,
Is that there should be a target for each session, and you're fundamentally delivering to that target.
definitely. Yeah. I mean, you seem like a very positive guy, by the way. Did you ever have any kind of struggles with feeling positive and up for it on sort of race day?
The sadness for me is I hate being beaten.
True
And so
competitor.
well, but to that end, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You have to be really careful with it. But I think to that end, actually, racing's where I love to be. Um, Funnily enough, I was at European Masters the last year in Rome, and it was. I tell you what was brilliant about it. We did the relay. We did the medley relay. I can't remember what the age, 140 years or whatever it was. So most of the guys are the same age as me, and it was brilliant in the call room And I said to the guys, I said to them, this is where it's at. This is
Yeah, yeah.
electric, isn't it? This is what I love. It was so exciting because it was proper nerves, proper anxiety about what was to come, but at the same time, and again, I think people are nervous or fear anxiety. And I think actually anxiety is your friend as long as you know how to control it and use it. And actually, for me, when you're racing like that, I love it. It's like a sponge. I lap it up. I think it's great, and it's what makes all the training worthwhile. So, to some extent, definitely nervous at races, but never. I can't think I've ever raced and thought, I can't be bothered. I don't think I've ever done that.
No, I can relate to you 100% because I'm exactly the same as you. I love racing and I love the nerves. You made a really good comment there, which was that anxiety is your friend, and I completely agree with you because I need anxiety to focus. Because otherwise I'll just be chatting to people and I'll just, and then I'll go, oh my God, my race is in 2 minutes. Where's my hat? Where's my goggles? So I need the
There's some anxiety for you.
Yeah. So, well, sure, but
sounded the wrong sort of anxiety.
Too little, too late by then. But yeah, I need the nerves just to kind of get me in the zone. So I mean, I love it. No, that's really fascinating. So I want to talk now a little bit about the people that you've worked with then, because you'll have come across loads of different personalities, which is probably the most interesting part of it, I'd imagine. But first and foremost, you mentioned him earlier, David Walliams, some of the English Channel, Gibraltar Straits, the length of the Thames. You've worked with James Cracknell, Cheryl Cole, Chris Moyles, Gary Barlow, Eddie Izzard, probably others as well. I mean, like I say, you must have encountered so many different personalities, bodies, mindsets, all the rest of it. How much of your kind of coaching was around getting them just to believe in themselves, when they were putting all those hard yards in for the training?
That's a great question because you've answered the question to some extent, because I think everything starts at belief.
Yeah.
Nothing exists without belief because belief is what drives commitment. So if you believe that you can, and that doesn't mean to say that you can turn up tomorrow and do what the goal is, but you believe that you can get to that goal, whatever that goal is. I think if you believe it, what you then do is commit to it, and you commit the time, you commit the effort, you commit the resources, you commit the finance, everything. You commit to it. And the crucial thing about that belief then driving commitment is that with that commitment, what you then start to see is the rewards. You start to see the improvement. It's measurable. It's palpable. And because you then start to see that improvement, what that then drives is it drives motivation. Because now you're thinking, I am getting better. This is fantastic. I'm going to keep doing it. And of course, with that motivation then comes greater belief because all of a sudden we're getting closer to that end goal. And so now we're motivated to go for it because we're starting to see improvements. We're starting to move along that progression. So now we start to believe even more that we can do it. So now what we do is we recommit and we consolidate our commitment. And with that commitment, we start to improve a bit more. That drives motivation. And so it's circular in the sense, but none of it starts without belief. And I think what's really important, certainly one thing that I work on almost entirely, it's an interesting one with the sport relief and comic relief and now children in need that I work with, is that and this is exactly the same as it is for an athlete. An athlete, you see athletes change coaches. And one of the primary drivers of changing a coach is about belief, is that you move to another coach because you believe they can deliver what you require to get to your goal. And that beliefs are really important because that drives confidence and everything else we've spoken about, commitment and motivation. So I think one of the things that I always work with when I've worked on all of those challenges is the sure and certain knowledge that they can achieve it. And then that becomes a bit of a double-edged sword because then all of a sudden people around you think, oh, well, Greg's looking after him. 100% it's done. Oh, it's fine. We're going to do this. And it's like, well, it's not quite that simple.
No.
But I do think instilling belief in it is really, really important, and making sure that you can get to that position of belief, and you can develop that and manufacture that. It doesn't necessarily have to exist in the first instance. You can develop it. The one thing, interesting enough, the one thing you can't develop, it's very difficult to develop, is want, the desire. That's the really difficult one
Mm.
to develop. You've got to really all these things, whatever we're doing, you've got to want to do it, and to some extent, there should be a reason why you
Yeah.
want to do it. And I think if you've got that, then what we can do is we can actually develop the rest of it. So we can develop belief, commitment, we can develop motivation, we can develop the program, we can develop everything. But that initial desire is really important.
Definitely. You described like that linear line that you create through all the different sort of processes that you go through, but obviously it's never completely linear, is it? You get your little ups and downs, both in mindset
Always.
and obviously possible injuries and stuff. But are there any sort of stories that you can remember from working with these athletes where it really dropped down a hill halfway through the process and you really had to pick them back up?
Oh, I mean, like some classics. I think that's absolutely. I mean, you sort of hit the nail on the head in the sense that it's not a smooth road. This journey to success. Coining these lovely sort of phrases that everybody uses, but it is true that there are bumps in the road. But I think invariably, those bumps are really important because what they do is that they enable you to create solutions. And I work very much on this idea of what's called an if-then plan. That if something happens, then this is the solution. And I think during that process of training is that those questions often come up. What happens? If I'm doing a 10K race, what happens if I bonk? What happens if I run out of energy? Well, by doing that distance, now all of a sudden you know that it's possible. Now what you've got to do is find a solution to it, and then what you can do is apply that solution and make sure that it works. All of a sudden now you're confident in that solution, and what initially looked like a problem actually is now a problem solved, and is now a benefit because you know that there will be people in that race who will blow up because what they haven't done is they haven't created a solution for it, whereas you've got that solution, so that gives you real confidence. But equally, there are some things that are really quite difficult to predict. I was working with an athlete once who prior to the London Marathon had his car broken into, and so why somebody did this? They nicked his training shoes and his kit. Now I can tell you that his running underpants and his shoes are two things that I would never touch without a hazmat suit on. So why anybody nicked them is beyond me. But of course, in something like that, that's a real issue because the most important thing never to do in a marathon is wear a new pair of shoes. And you see it every year, and so it's creating solutions to that. But interestingly enough, the solution to that was the fact that actually I'd already spoken to him beforehand. And invariably what I do on those type of approaches is that actually they're already using 3 pairs of trainers and they alternate them in training. They get 1 pair nicked, they've still got 2 pairs at home that they can use and they're confident with, etc. So, but of course, there are things that are problematic. And then, you think David Walliams, when we swam the Thames, for example, day 3, when he got seriously sick. I mean, he had diarrhea and vomiting overnight. And we're on a schedule.
Yeah,
we're on the schedule. But again, it was predicted. I got some of the team to look after him, so we gave him a big bolus of what's called azithromycin, so an antibiotic, and then we popped an antiemetic under his tongue to stop him vomiting. And at 5:30 in the morning, I kicked him back into the water. He was moving a bit slower than I wanted him to, but at least he was in. But yeah, I mean, I think that when you are sort of pressing the envelope, that your personal envelope of performance, things will happen. But I think the crucial thing is don't be downhearted by that because it happens to everybody.
of course.
The crucial thing is, as I always say to people, it's only failure if you fail to learn. And I think that's the way to approach these things. It might not have worked out, but you've learned something by it not working out. You'll adapt that and it will work next time.
No, I like that. Sort of sticking on the David Walliams theme then. So the first time you ever worked with him on a major swimming challenge, and obviously this will apply to every athlete that you work with, but let's talk about David specifically. How much kind of sort of almost testing did you have to do with him just to work out what were his limits to start with, and therefore how can you put a program in place that you know that he will be able to achieve?
Yeah, well, interesting one. So the first time I worked with David, we started in September 2005, prior to the English Channel swim in
Yeah.
2006. And actually, the first thing that I did with him was make sure he wasn't going to die on me. So I mean, I'm a cardiovascular scientist by trade, and I established what is the UK's, and actually at the time was the world's first sports cardiology centre. So one of the things that is absolutely crucial, particularly in those type of challenges where we're taking somebody who's absolutely, had never done anything like that before.
Yeah.
Is just to make sure that he was safe. I mean, safety is everything. So, once we got past that, it was then trying to understand where he was, what was his level. And I've heard wonderful stories about how great David was at swimming when he first started, which are all completely untrue. I mean, he could swim. He could swim because that's what he did. That's what he loved. He loved swimming. He loved the pool. He had never swum open water. And invariably he was in the pool generally for about half an hour. So that tells you where he was at. Now, he could swim front crawl, so that was a real bonus. I have worked with people. I did something for This Morning on ITV with 3 women, which was one of my favourite challenges of all time. Where when they turned up, of the 4 of them, 3 were doing head up breaststroke.
Perfect.
And I had to explain. I did have to explain to them that when we swim in English Channel, it is impossible to keep your hair dry. Okay, so it doesn't matter how you hold your head. You're going to get it wet.
I disagree. So, I managed to keep mine dry.
Well, I could see that. And then Pat, who was part of the crew, she actually swam front crawl, but she was actually slower than the head up breaststrokers. So it was an interesting group. But I think So I think understanding the starting place is absolutely crucial. And generally, what I use tests. The multiple tests that you can use, but I think for swimming, great tests, particularly in the early days, it's just some time trials. Time trials are really valuable because they give you a real sort of currency of where you are at. And depending on what, obviously in the early days, you can't do the big long time trials, but 200s, 400s can be really informative. They give you an idea about what the time targets are on sets. Because what speed they're moving at when they're moving at, when over 400, for example, so you can set 200 reps and 100 reps using that information. And I think most importantly is that, so you've got again, this is a little thing that I do, but it's called profile. So you profile the athlete, find out where they're currently at. And that profiling then allows you to prescribe. So you prescribe the training program of it. And then crucially, retesting allows you to monitor. So we focus. Let's say we're focusing on speed. So what we've done is there are obviously lots of things that we can do, but let's say we're doing 50 meter time trial from 50 meter max from push start, and we're going to spend 6 weeks focused on the speed. That monitoring should show us that we've improved speed over a 50 max push start.
Yeah.
Now, if it doesn't, it tells us that what we've done is wrong. That's not a failure, but it means we've got to adapt it. Equally, how much have we improved, and have we improved enough? So do we still have to maintain that focus, or can we move on to a different aspect of training? And of course, notwithstanding that, part of that process obviously will, within that process is technical, tactical, psychological, so to make sure that everything's built into it as we go through.
No, that's really interesting. So thinking about all the celebrities that you've worked with, that and other people as well, who's the one person that you've worked with where you just think, wow, this person is incredible. They've got an amazing mindset. Physically, they're brilliant, or they've come a long, long way from the start to the finish. Who jumps out to you?
Well, God, I mean, most of them, to be honest, to be absolutely frank, it's one of those ones. Who's your favourite? Which is your favourite child? Actually, I do have a favourite child, but let's not go there because they might be listening. I don't know. No, I think, without any shadow of doubt, David Walliams is one of the toughest men I've ever met. I mean, we did some brutal training for the channel, and because of the time of year, just the nature of it. But equally, John Bishop, Davina McCall, Greg James. We did the pedal to the peaks through the there was a named Storm at the time, and it was it was brutal. I mean, utterly brutal on the road. But God, what a mindset that guy's got is brilliant. But in terms of where they come from, I tell you who was amazing was Joe Brand. We walked from Hull to Liverpool, which was effectively about somewhere just around a marathon a day, and it was extraordinary. Her tenacity and drive was stunning, and you wouldn't necessarily look at that because it wasn't running or triathlon or swimming, but actually it was remarkable how hard she worked and how she dug in through some horrendous weather that we had on that particular walk. But in general, that they are all great because listen, they're giving up their time for free, and it's not just the challenge; it's all of the training that goes into it, and in order to make people's lives who are much less fortunate than us better. And so, to my mind, they're all heroes.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Love the Joe Brand story, by the way. It reminds me of a little joke that she said once on stage, which was that she was trying to lose weight. She tried everything, running, yoga, all the rest of it. And then the doctor said to her, do something every day that gets you out of breath. So she said she started smoking. she never mentioned the challenge. That's funny.
She doesn't talk. She doesn't talk to me anymore.
No, I bet she doesn't. So thinking about our swimmers then that are listening to this, we all have challenges along the way, physically, mentally, busy lives, all the rest of it. I've spoken to a few people recently who are transitioning from, say, being a sprinter to a bit more middle distance, or even like a 1500 or something like that, and they're incredibly nervous. It feels like a big challenge to them, and it absolutely is. Do you have a kind of a toolkit almost that these people can sort of, or anybody can sort of like just call on and think, okay, these are the checkpoints that I need to kind of go through to make sure that I'm going to be okay here?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that it's not a step change. You don't go from 100-meter swimming to 10K open water in a day. And actually, I think some people think that's what you've got to do. So suddenly, today I'm a 50-meter sprinter. Tomorrow I'm going to become a 10K open water swimmer, and it just doesn't happen like that. I think so. To my mind, progression is everything. So you've got to progress towards it. And I think as part of that, we spoke about goals, but I think goal setting is really important as part of that as well. Is that rather than because as a 50-meter sprinter, you think about 10. So you're going from 30 seconds of swimming to 3 hours of swimming. Now, that's a big step. And the idea that you can cope with, not only physically cope with that, but actually mentally cope with that. I mean, it's a long time to be on your own. And so I think it is about progression through that, but setting these short-term and medium-term goals. So you actually think, look, we're going to start working from 50 meters. Let's start working at 400 meters. Let's move ourselves to be a 400-meter swimmer. And then what's interesting is I think we were chatting about this earlier about Carrie Ann when she moved from 800 to 10K is that to her mind it wasn't a massive transition. And I think actually as you transit 50 meters to 200 meters is you talk to Foz about it, talk to Mark Foster about it. It's like 200 meters is that's like the marathon.
It is.
That's like a 10K. You know what I mean? So actually in the early days I think those steps are much bigger, and actually those steps get smaller. So as you go from 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1500, and then actually 1500 into what not most, but a lot of open water races are sort of around that 3 to 4K area, up to 5K, and then 5K to 10K. Well, that 5K to 10K step is probably the same as 50 meters to 200. So I don't think you need to be nervous about the fact that because I think the fear comes from thinking about this huge elephant in front of you. And as the saying goes, you got to eat it one bite at a time. You can't swallow the whole thing. And I think as you get into that progression, what you'll find is it does get easier and easier in terms of the transition to the next goal as you move along it.
No, I completely get that. So have you got any tips for swimmers who sort of feel that burn mentally go? I mean, you talked about this earlier about
don't do it. Don't do
yes. It. No, but you talked earlier about the idea that it's all about the training that you've put in, and so therefore the mindset should always be a result of what you've put in beforehand. But if you've got a swimmer who particularly gets pretty nervous before an event, have you got any sort of tips about the way that they can, in the few weeks before, are there things that they can do so that they can be as positive as possible on race day?
I think one of the mistakes that I often see and you've probably spoken about it before, but is outcome goals or outcome focus instead of process focus. I think what a lot of people do is that they come into racing and what all they can think about is where am I going to come, what time am I going to do, and both of those are outcomes of what you put into it, of the process itself. And the big problem with that is that it's very difficult to control the outcome. Particularly if you're looking to improve on that outcome, you're trying to set a PB, or it's the first time that you've done that race, so you're not quite sure where it's going to be and all that sort of stuff. And I think what it's the uncertainty of that which drives the anxiety. Whereas I think just take a step back and it's a horrible. I actually don't like the term at all, but control the controllables. But what that's effectively saying is, look, control the process. You can control what you do in this race. So the first thing you're thinking about is, I'm not thinking about what time I'm going to do or where I'm going to come. I'm thinking about pacing. If I'm doing a 200, what's the first 50 going to look like? How and the great thing about where training comes in that is that the real difficulty. It's really interesting when you talk to athletes from other sports. Is the real difficulty with swimming is you've got no feedback at all when it comes to quantitative feedback. You can't, you might be able to glance the clock if you're lucky, but fundamentally you don't know when you started, so you don't really know what's going on. You've got nothing telling you what pace you're going at. And so everything is semantic. Everything's based on feel. And that's why training is so important, because what training gives you is it gives you an understanding. So everybody on this who's listening to this will know that, after a period of time, once you're doing, the first time you do 10 200s off of 3 minutes, you're all over the place for the first 5. And then you're hanging in for dear life on the second 5, But once you've done that a few times, all of a sudden you get an understanding of what that pace should be, what the first 50 look like, but critically how it feels. And what you're doing is you're developing that understanding so that when you race, I'm going to say, for me, if I over 200, for example, so I swam a 200 at the European Masters last year, and it was all about the first 50 for me is actually almost like I'm cruising, and that's the pace I'm looking for. I'm looking for a cruise. Now, it takes a lot of bravery to cruise the first 50 at Europeans, because you're thinking because not only are you thinking to yourself, I can go quicker than this, of course I can. The question is, should I go quicker than this? And then you look around and you see people are going quicker than that. But you've got to hold your nerve, because based on that feel, I know that I'm going to come back in on the second 50. And then it's the third 50 where I kick down and really put the effort in. And then the fourth 50, I'm hanging in for dear life. But in of that, I'm not thinking to myself, I want to go sub 210. I want to get on the podium. What I'm thinking to myself is, what's the feel going to be over the first 50? What am I going to do at the first turn? How am I going to respond on that second 50? And so what I'm doing is I'm moving from outcome into process. And by doing that, I'm in complete control of that process. And so therefore the fear tends to evaporate. There's still, you still got that sort of competition feel, but the fear evaporates because now I'm in control of it.
I love that. That's pretty. You described that so well. What sort of a swimmer are you then? So you did a 200 free at the Europeans. Is that your main event?
It's funnily enough, last year I raced. So I raced the Thames. I did a big challenge. So I went from Lechlade to Teddington Lock to attempt to break a world record, to set the world record. Where I was, to put it into perspective, day 1, I swam 53,000 meters, and then had to replicate that on day 2 and day 3. So I just actually finished that challenge, and then I went out to Europeans with a very dodgy arm, which I picked up. and so I did have a couple of other events that I was going to do, but I just isolated it to 200 free because I thought 200 free in the relays because I love the relays. But it was a good move because I got bronze, which was really lovely.
Oh, brilliant.
Um, but listen, I guess by trade I'm a backstroker, and I love the 100 back. The 200 back is utter purgatory. But I guess where I've raced the most would be 100 free upwards, 100, 200, 400, 1500, and then obviously open up to 10k.
Brilliant. Going to do the British Champs this year?
If I can, it's always at a bad time of year for me, really, just in terms of fitting it in. But I'd love to. I've never done it before, so I would love to do it.
Nice. And have you got any other master swim meets that you've already signed up to, or that you've definitely got earmarked?
Well, so it's an interesting one because Worlds this year is in Japan. It's a long old way to go, but I'd love to go. But so I'm sort of half considering that. But definitely, I mean, I race for the squad, so we'll definitely be doing counties. I'm going to try and get again. Nationals is actually in half term. I've got 3 kids, so it's a bit of a sticky one. But hopefully, definitely national. Well, definitely counties. Hopefully nationals, and then maybe worlds if I can get out there. If I can convince the wife.
Yeah, sounds good. And final question: well, outside of master swimming, any major challenges that you're working on at the moment?
But funnily enough, I've just completed sort of 3 back-to-back major challenges personally. And it sort of smattered within there. I looked after children in need over various challenges. Last year was Scott Mills, and before that was Sophie Ellis Bextor. But this year I'm actually working on a channel challenge where we're going to be taking a relay across. And I'm working with a mate of mine, Alice Ty. So those that know Paralympic swimming, she's an absolute legend. So me and Alice are working together on a very new squad of swimmers to do a channel relay, which I think is really exciting. Actually, I love those type of challenges. So that's certainly going to be this summer.
No, that sounds absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed that. I could chat all day, but unfortunately, we've both got busy lives.
That's it. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you, and I hope to see you soon at a competition.
I look forward to it, Joe.
Cheers. Take care. Thanks.
See you. Bye.